The desert stretched endlessly, a vast, unforgiving land where the sun blazed down without mercy. It was here, amidst the scorching heat and barren sand, that Sani, a young Apache girl, found herself alone. She had once been part of a vibrant community, surrounded by her family, her people, but now she was a survivor, a girl whose world had been shattered in an instant. Sani's tribe had been attacked. The settlers who had moved into the land her people had once called home had shown no mercy. The night the attack happened, her family was torn apart. She had managed to escape, running as fast as she could, but the days that followed were filled with fear, hunger, and isolation. The days turned into weeks as she wandered through the desert, hoping to find some sign of life, anything to guide her out of this nightmare. Her clothes were torn, and her feet were blistered from walking endlessly. The heat of the desert was unbearable, and water was a rare gift. She had nothing left but her will to survive, but even that was beginning to fade. On this particular day, Sani stumbled under the intense heat of the sun. Her vision blurred and her strength faded. She knew that she could not keep going much longer. Meanwhile, far from Sani's troubled journey, a cowboy named Eli rode slowly through the same desert. Eli was a man of few words, a simple cowboy who had never been part of the grand schemes of the world. His life was spent working hard on a ranch, earning just enough to survive. He wasn't rich, nor did he ever expect to be. But what he lacked in wealth, he made up for in kindness. Eli was someone who believed in helping others, even when it cost him something. Eli had grown up on the frontier, and he had seen more than his share of hardship. He knew the desert well, understood its dangers, and had learned how to navigate it from a young age. That's why, as he rode through the empty, dusty land, his eyes were constantly scanning the horizon. He was looking for cattle that had wandered away from the herd, but he was also looking for anything out of the ordinary. When he spotted the young woman lying in the sand, he immediately slowed his horse. Her small form barely seemed to stir in the heat of the day, and something about her position made Eli's stomach tighten. He urged his horse forward, his heart racing. As he neared her, he saw her face, tired, covered in dust, and pale from exhaustion. She appeared lifeless, and Eli's first thought was that she had collapsed from dehydration. Without hesitation, Eli dismounted and knelt beside her. He gently touched her shoulder, calling softly to her. "Hey, miss, you all right?" he asked, his voice calm yet filled with concern. Sani's eyes fluttered open, her vision blurry at first. She could barely make out the figure of the man leaning over her. She blinked, trying to focus, her parched throat too dry to respond. Eli could see the fear in her eyes that told a story of pain, loss, and survival. "Don't worry," Eli said softly, though he didn't know if she could understand. "I'm not going to hurt you." He quickly looked around, realizing that they were in the middle of nowhere, far from any towns or settlements. If she didn't get help soon, she might not make it. With gentle hands, he lifted her into his arms. She was light, but her limpness worried him. He placed her carefully on his horse and mounted behind her, holding her securely. He didn't know who she was or where she had come from, but he knew one thing. He couldn't leave her there. The ride back to his small cabin was long, and Eli kept his eyes focused on the road ahead, never once looking back at the stranger who had come into his life so suddenly. He couldn't help but wonder about her. Who was she? Where had she come from? But there was no time to ask questions, not when her life was in his hands. When they finally reached his cabin, Eli carefully helped the girl off the horse and inside. The cabin was modest, with only the bare essentials: a simple bed, a small table, and a stove for cooking. He quickly made a fire, gathered some water, and prepared some food, all the while keeping an eye on the girl. He didn't know what else to do, so he did what he had always done when faced with someone in need. He offered them kindness without asking for anything in return. He placed a glass of water next to her and sat beside her, waiting for her to regain her strength. As the day faded into night, the girl began to stir. She was still weak, but her eyes were open now, and she seemed more aware of her surroundings. She looked at Eli, who was sitting quietly by the fire, his back turned to her. Her gaze was filled with suspicion at first. The cowboy, a stranger, had come to her aid, but she couldn't forget who she was, what she had lost. She was Apache, and in her heart she knew that she couldn't trust anyone. But Eli wasn't like the others who had taken everything from her. He hadn't hurt her, and he had offered her food and shelter without expecting anything in return. His kindness was something she hadn't experienced in a long time, and it made her hesitate. When Eli noticed that she was awake, he turned to face her. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice gentle. Sonny struggled to sit up, her body aching. She was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, but there was something inside her that made her want to speak. "Why are you helping me?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from thirst. Eli leaned forward, his expression kind but serious. "I've seen people lost out here before," he said quietly. "No one deserves to die alone in the desert." "You didn't deserve that." Sonny felt a strange mix of gratitude and confusion. She had never met anyone like Eli before. People had always taken from her people, from her tribe. Yet here was a man who had given without asking for anything in return. Sonny's mind raced. She had no idea who this man was or what his intentions might be, but for the first time in weeks she allowed herself to feel a small flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was still some goodness left in the world. And so in that small, humble cabin in the desert, two lives began to intertwine in the most unexpected way. Neither of them knew what the future would hold, but for the moment, they had each other. Eli's simple act of kindness had given Sonny a chance at survival, but it was the bond that was beginning to form between them that would change both of their lives forever. The days that followed Eli's decision to help Sonny were quiet, yet full of a strange and undeniable tension. Sonny, though grateful for his help, remained distant. Her survival instincts had always been sharp, and they told her to be cautious. The desert had taught her that people were often not to be trusted, especially in times of weakness. She had learned to rely on herself alone, and opening up to anyone seemed like a dangerous choice. Eli, on the other hand, was a man who had lived alone for most of his life. He was used to solitude and had little experience with forming close connections, but something about Sonny's quiet presence stirred a deep compassion in him. It wasn't just the need to help someone in danger. It was the way she carried herself with an inner strength, a strength he recognized because he, too, had known hardship. As the days passed, Sonny began to recover. Her strength returned slowly, and with each passing day, she became more aware of the kindness Eli had shown her. He never asked questions, never pushed her to speak about her past. He simply gave her food, water, and a safe place to rest, asking for nothing in return. Eli's cabin was small and humble, but it was more than enough for the two of them. It was tucked away in a valley, miles from the nearest town, and the isolation provided a sense of peace. There was something comforting about the simplicity of the life he led. Every morning he would wake early to tend to his small garden, then go out on horseback to check on his cattle. Sonny would spend her days resting, and as she regained her strength, she began to help with small chores around the cabin. The first time she offered to help with the cooking, Eli was hesitant. He wasn't used to anyone else sharing the responsibilities of his daily routine, but he accepted her offer without complaint. He had learned by now that Sonny didn't speak much, but her actions spoke louder than words. She worked quietly with purpose, moving with a grace that reminded him of a wild animal in the desert, self-sufficient and free. One evening, as they sat together after a simple meal, Eli broke the silence. "You don't have to talk about it, but I'm here if you ever want to share. You've been through a lot, I can tell." Sonny, who had been staring into the flickering flames of the fire, turned her gaze toward him. For a long moment she didn't say anything. She wasn't sure if she was ready to speak of her past, of the destruction of her tribe, the people she had lost, and the bloodshed she had witnessed. But there was something in Eli's eyes that made her hesitate. It wasn't pity or judgment. It was just understanding. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the silence between them. "My people, they were taken from me." "The settlers?" She paused, her throat tightening at the memory. "They took everything. My family. My home." Eli didn't say anything. He simply listened. Sonny continued, the words coming more easily now. "I was supposed to stay with them. I was supposed to protect them. But I couldn't save them. Now I have nothing." The pain in her voice was palpable, and for the first time, Eli truly understood the depth of her loss. He didn't need to ask for details. He could see it in the way she carried herself, the weight she carried inside her. She wasn't just a girl who had survived an attack. She was a survivor who had lost everything she knew, everything she loved. "I'm sorry," Eli said quietly. He reached over and placed a hand on hers, offering comfort. He didn't know what else to say. There were no words that could erase the hurt she had endured, no words that could fix the past. But in that moment, he hoped his presence could bring her some small measure of peace. Sani didn't pull away from his touch. She let herself sit there in silence, her fingers lightly resting in his. It was strange. She had grown so used to being alone, to bearing her pain in isolation. Yet now, in this simple cabin with this quiet cowboy, she felt a strange comfort. It was a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to feel for so long. In the days that followed, Sani began to open up more to Eli, little by little. She would help him with the chores, and sometimes while they worked, they would exchange stories. Eli spoke of his life, his family that had long since passed, the ranch he worked on as a young man, and the struggles he faced growing up. It wasn't much, but it gave Sani a glimpse into the man behind the cowboy. Sani, in turn, began to share pieces of her own life, of the beauty of the land where her people had lived, the traditions she had grown up with, and the pride she felt in her heritage. Though their worlds were different, they found common ground in their shared experiences of loss and survival. One afternoon, as Eli worked to mend a fence outside the cabin, Sani decided to try something different. She had noticed that Eli often came home covered in dust and sweat, and she had learned that he rarely took time for himself. So she surprised him with a simple gesture, a bath of fresh, cool water from the well. When Eli returned to the cabin, his face and hands streaked with dirt, he found the water waiting for him. For a moment, he stood in the doorway looking at Sani. He was surprised, but not in a bad way. "You didn't have to do that," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. Sani didn't smile back, but there was something in her eyes that made Eli realize how much she had changed in the short time she had been with him. She had gone from a girl who refused help to someone who was learning to give it herself. She was no longer just a survivor of the past, she was beginning to rebuild. "I wanted to help," she said simply. "You work hard. You deserve it." Eli nodded, touched by her kindness. He had never been the type to expect anything from anyone, and yet here was Sani, offering him something he hadn't known he needed. It was a small thing, a simple bath, but it meant more to him than he could put into words. As the days turned into weeks, Eli and Sani's bond grew stronger. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something deeper, an understanding, a shared connection that came from the kindness they had shown each other. They were two people who had been broken by life, but in each other they found healing. Sani still dreamed of revenge, of justice for her people, but now there was a part of her that wanted more. She wanted a future, a life beyond the pain and loss. And as she looked at Eli, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she had found someone who could help her build that future. But for now, she was content to let the days pass slowly. She was no longer alone, and in Eli's quiet company she was beginning to see that maybe the world wasn't as unforgiving as it had seemed. The days in Eli's cabin passed in a peaceful rhythm, the quiet of the desert settling over them like a gentle blanket. Eli and Sani had grown accustomed to each other's company. The bond between them was undeniable, a quiet understanding that didn't need words to be expressed. Eli had offered her safety, and in return, Sani had begun to show him a kindness that he had not known he needed. Life was simple, and for the first time in a long time, they both felt like they could breathe. But in the world beyond the desert, things were not as calm. Eli had always known that living alone in such an isolated place could be a double-edged sword. The quiet, peaceful life he led in the desert was a far cry from the bustling towns where men and women lived their lives with gossip and rumors. Eli never concerned himself with what others thought of him. He kept to himself, did his work, and never got involved with the busy affairs of the, townsfolk. But Sani was different. The town near Eli's cabin, about a day's ride away, had started to notice the mysterious young woman who had been living with Eli. At first, it was just a few whispers in the market, the women gossiping about the stranger in Eli's life. "Who is she?" they asked. "Where did she come from?" Some claimed to have seen her walking near the outskirts of town, her dark hair tied in a braid, her face a picture of quiet defiance. Others were more suspicious. A few of the more distrustful men began to ask questions, wondering if the Apache girl was more than she appeared to be. Eli had always been somewhat of a loner, but now that he was seen with a woman, people began to speculate. Some of the town's older residents had long memories of the Apache people, and they couldn't shake the old fears they had carried for years. The thought of a young Apache woman living with Eli, especially after what had happened to Sandy's people, stirred old anxieties. Eli had been aware of the rumors. He wasn't naive enough to think that no one would notice. Still, he tried to ignore the whispers and continue with his life. He had more pressing matters, like ensuring his ranch was well kept and that his small garden survived the harsh desert heat. But as the weeks passed, the whispers grew louder, and soon the men from town came to Eli's cabin. It was a hot afternoon when they arrived, riding hard through the dust on their horses. Eli had just finished mending a fence when he spotted them approaching. There were 3 of them: George, the local sheriff, and 2 ranch hands from the larger ranch nearby. Eli recognized them immediately. They were men he had spoken to in passing, but he wasn't friends with any of them. Eli stood up, wiping his hands on his trousers, and waited for them to come closer. He could see the suspicion in their eyes as they stopped just outside his gate. George the sheriff was the first to speak. "Eli," he called, his voice deep but not unfriendly. "We need to have a word with you." Eli didn't respond right away. He didn't like the way the sheriff had said his name, like they were already judging him. He knew what this was about. They had questions, and they wouldn't stop asking until they got answers. "Sure," Eli said, stepping toward them, his posture calm but his eyes alert. "What's this about?" George tipped his hat back, looking Eli in the eye. "It's about that girl, the one you've been keeping company with. Folks in town are starting to talk. They're asking questions. Who is she, Eli? What's she doing out here?" Eli took a deep breath. He had expected this moment to come. "She's no trouble, George. I found her out in the desert nearly dead. She needed help. That's all." The sheriff narrowed his eyes. "And you're just taking her in?" "You don't know anything about her, Eli. She could be dangerous." Eli's hand instinctively rested on the handle of his shovel, but he kept his voice steady. "She's not dangerous. She's just a woman who got lost. I'm not a man to turn away someone in need, especially not when they're on the edge of death." The other men, the ranch hands, exchanged uneasy glances. It was clear that they didn't fully trust Eli's explanation. The tensions between the settlers and the Apache had been high for years, and the town wasn't exactly known for its acceptance of outsiders. A woman like Sandy, an Apache woman living under Eli's roof no matter the circumstances, wasn't something that would be easily accepted. "We don't mean to cause trouble," George continued, his voice softening slightly, "but people are worried. Folks don't like the idea of an Apache woman in these parts. You know what happened to the McKinley family up north? People remember." Eli's face hardened at the mention of the McKinley family. The McKinleys were good people, and they had been murdered by a group of Apache raiders years ago. The memory still haunted many of the townsfolk, fueling their distrust of anyone connected to the Apache tribe. "I know what happened," Eli replied evenly, "and I know what people think. But that's not who she is. I can promise you that." The sheriff wasn't convinced. "It's not about what you promise, Eli. It's about what the town thinks. You know how people talk. If you're not careful, you could find yourself in a heap of trouble." There was a long pause. Eli could feel the weight of their words. They were right in a way. People in town didn't take kindly to outsiders, especially not those who were different. And with Sandy being Apache, it was only a matter of time before the rumors turned ugly. "I've done nothing wrong," Eli said finally, his voice calm but firm, "and I'll continue to help anyone who needs it, no matter where they come from. If you've got a problem with that, you'll have to take it up with someone else." George gave a short nod, his expression unreadable. "Just keep in mind, Eli, that the town doesn't take kindly to strangers. You're a good man, but sometimes doing the right thing can be harder than you think." The sheriff turned his horse around, and with a grunt, the 2 ranch hands followed. Eli stood at the gate watching them ride off. The silence that followed felt heavy, like a storm hanging in the air. Sandy had been watching from the window of the cabin, though she had made sure not to be seen. When Eli returned inside, she didn't ask about the men. She already knew. The tension in his posture, the tightness in his jaw. It was enough to tell her everything she needed to know. "Are we in trouble?" she asked softly. Eli didn't answer right away. He walked over to the stove and poured himself a drink, his back turned to her. "I don't know yet," he said after a long moment. Sandy sat in silence, her mind racing. She had feared something like this would happen. The world outside the cabin was full of suspicion and fear, and she was the one who had brought that into their peaceful life. She had never meant for this to happen, but now it seemed like her presence could bring Eli more harm than good. "I never wanted to cause trouble," she said quietly, her voice tinged with regret. Eli turned to face her, his expression softening. "You didn't cause anything, Sonny. This is my problem, not yours. You don't have to worry about them. You're safe here," but Sonny wasn't so sure. She knew that trouble was already on its way, and no matter how much Eli tried to protect her, the world outside would always be a reminder of the difference between them. The days after the visit from the sheriff and the ranch hands were heavy with silence. Eli did his best to carry on with life, tending to the horses, mending fences, and taking care of the few chores that kept the small ranch running. He worked harder than ever, trying to stay busy, but his mind often wandered back to the conversation with the men from town. He knew the whispers wouldn't stop. People in the town were bound to keep asking questions. As much as Eli wanted to shield Sonny from the harsh judgment of others, he realized it wasn't something he could control. What bothered him more than the gossip, though, was the quiet change he saw in Sonny. She had become more withdrawn, as though the visit had triggered something deep within her. Eli noticed the way she would often stare out over the desert, her face hard and distant, as though she were looking at something far beyond the horizon. She no longer joined him in the evenings by the fire, preferring instead to sit alone in the shadows, wrapped in her thoughts. Eli didn't ask her what was on her mind. He could tell she was working through something that had nothing to do with him. It wasn't until one evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, that Sonny finally spoke. "I can't stay here forever," she said, her voice low but steady. She didn't look at Eli as she spoke. Instead, her gaze remained fixed on the horizon, where the sky was painted in shades of orange and pink. Eli looked up from his work, surprised by her words. "What do you mean?" he asked. Sonny took a deep breath. "This place, it's safe for now, but it won't always be. People don't forget. The town, the sheriff, they'll come for me eventually." Eli walked over to her, his boots crunching softly on the dry earth. "I don't care about the town. They don't matter. You're safe here with me." Sonny finally turned to him, her eyes darker than Eli had ever seen them. "It's not about that," she said, her voice growing sharper. "It's about what happened to my people, to my family. I can't forget that, Eli. I can't just hide away in this cabin while the ones who did this are still out there." Eli felt a tightness in his chest. He understood her pain. He did, but he also knew that vengeance, though a powerful feeling, could change a person in ways that might never be undone. "You don't have to do this alone, Sonny. You've been through enough. We can figure something out. You don't need to go looking for trouble." Sonny's lips tightened. "You don't understand," she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly but with determination. "I didn't just lose my family, Eli. I lost everything. The people who did this, they're still out there, living their lives like nothing happened. I can't just forget about it. I can't let them walk free while my people are gone." Her words hung in the air between them like a storm. Eli could see the fierce anger in her eyes, the kind of anger that could drive someone to do things they might regret later. He could feel the weight of her pain, but he also knew that revenge was not the answer. It would only bring more suffering, for her and for others. "You don't have to carry this burden alone," Eli said softly, stepping closer. "I'm here. I'll stand by you whatever you decide. But don't let the past control you. Don't let it take everything from you." Sonny turned away from him, her expression unreadable. The desert wind whipped through her hair as she stared out into the vast emptiness, the shadows of the fading light stretching long across the earth. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, each of them thinking about what the future might hold. Finally, Sonny spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not asking you to come with me, Eli. I don't want you to be part of this, but I have to do it. I can't live with myself if I don't." Eli felt his heart sink. He didn't want to lose her, but he also knew he couldn't stop her. This was something she had to do for herself. "I can't stop you, Sonny," he said, his voice steady, though inside he felt a wave of dread. "But promise me you'll think about this. Think about the consequences. Revenge has a way of consuming everything. It doesn't stop at the people you're after. It changes you. It changes everything." Sonny's eyes softened for a brief moment, and for a second Eli saw the girl he had helped in the desert, the girl who had been scared and alone. But just as quickly that softness was gone, replaced by the determination he had come to recognize. "I've already lost everything. Eli, there's nothing left to lose," and with that, she turned away, walking slowly back to the cabin. Eli watched her, his heart heavy. He wanted to stop her, to convince her that there was another way. But he knew she had made up her mind. There was no changing it now. That night, as they sat in silence by the fire, neither of them spoke much. Eli had tried to convince Sonny that there was still a future beyond revenge, but deep down, he knew she wasn't ready to hear it. She had made her choice, and there was nothing he could do to change that. The next morning, after a quiet breakfast, Sonny packed a small bundle. She had made up her mind. She would go. She would track down the people who had taken her family and taken her world, and she would make them pay for what they had done. She would find the justice she believed she deserved, no matter the cost. Before she left, she turned to Eli, her face a mask of determination. "Thank you for everything, Eli," she said quietly. "I'll never forget what you did for me, but this is something I have to do." Eli stood silently, his heart heavy with worry. He wanted to say something, to stop her, but he couldn't. All he could do was watch as she walked away, disappearing into the desert. As the sun rose higher in the sky, Eli felt a sense of dread settle over him. He had hoped deep down that Sonny would stay, that together they could build something new. But he knew now that she couldn't. Her past had a hold on her, and no matter how much he wished things could be different, he knew that some wounds were too deep to heal, and so, as Sonny disappeared into the distance, Eli was left alone with his thoughts, wondering what would become of the girl he had helped and the man he had become in her presence. All he could do now was wait and pray that her journey would not lead her down a path she could never return from. The desert had always been a harsh, unforgiving place, but to Eli, it now felt even emptier than it ever had before. Days passed slowly after Sonny left, each one dragging on longer than the last. His life, once simple and solitary, was now filled with a heavy silence. The cabin, which had once felt like a refuge, now seemed like a cage. Eli spent his days tending to his animals, but his mind was never fully present. He would work for hours, his thoughts drifting back to Sanny. He wondered where she was, what she was doing, and if she had found what she was looking for. Deep down, he feared for her, knowing that the road she had chosen could lead to a path of no return. He missed her more than he cared to admit. She had become a part of his life, someone who had filled the emptiness that he had lived with for so long. Her strength, her courage, and even her quiet moments of vulnerability had touched something inside him that he hadn't known was there. But as the weeks turned into months, Eli couldn't help but wonder if he would ever see her again. He had tried to push those thoughts out of his mind, but it was impossible. She was a part of him now, and no matter how much he tried to distract himself, he couldn't escape the thought of her. One evening, as the sun began to dip behind the hills, Eli sat on the porch of his cabin, staring out at the vast stretch of land that seemed to go on forever. The wind whispered through the trees, and the air was still, heavy with the weight of his thoughts. Just as he was about to go back inside, a sound reached his ears. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, a sound of hooves beating against the ground. Eli stood up quickly, his heart racing. He wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment panic gripped him. Was it someone from the town? Had they come to find him, to question him again about Sonny? But as the figure grew closer, Eli's heart skipped a beat. He recognized the rider instantly. It was Sonny. Her horse kicked up dust as she rode toward him, her figure silhouetted against the fading light. She looked tired, but there was something in her eyes that told Eli that she had found what she was looking for. When she reached him, she dismounted, her movements slow but steady. She looked different, older somehow, though she was still the same person he had known. Her face was worn with the weight of what she had experienced. But there was a certain peace about her now, a peace that had not been there before. Eli didn't say anything at first. He just looked at her, his heart pounding in his chest. He wanted to say so much, to ask her about her journey, but the words caught in his throat. Sonny finally spoke, her voice quieter than usual, but there was a calmness to it that Eli hadn't heard before. "I'm back," she said simply. Eli nodded, his eyes softening. "I'm glad you're here." She gave him a small smile, though it didn't reach her eyes completely. I didn't find what I thought I would. I didn't find the justice I was looking for. Eli didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He could see the pain in her eyes and he knew what she meant. Vengeance, no matter how much she had wanted it, hadn't brought her the closure she thought it would. Instead, it had only left her with more questions, more doubts. I thought that getting revenge would fix things, Sani continued, her voice trembling slightly. I thought it would make me feel better, like I could finally move on. But it didn't, it only made things worse. I hurt people who didn't deserve it, and I saw the same pain in their eyes that I've been carrying in mine for all this time. Eli stepped forward, his heart aching for her. He knew it wasn't easy for her to admit this, but he was proud of her for facing the truth. She had gone down a difficult path, but she had come back stronger, wiser. I was so angry, Sani continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I was so angry at the world for taking everything from me. But I've realized now that the only way to truly heal is to let go of that anger. If I keep holding on to it, it'll only keep me trapped. Eli reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. She looked up at him, and for the first time in a long time, Eli saw a glimmer of the girl who had first walked into his life, the girl who had been so lost and broken but had found the strength to move forward. You've made it this far, Sani, Eli said gently, and that's something to be proud of. You've survived. You're stronger than you know. Sani's eyes softened, and for a moment the weight of the world seemed to lift from her shoulders. I don't know if I'll ever forget what happened, she said quietly, but I'm ready to try. I want to build a new life. I want to find peace. Eli smiled softly. You don't have to do it alone. You've got a place here with me. Sani looked up at him, her expression thoughtful. There was a long silence before she spoke again, her voice steady but uncertain. I don't know what the future holds, Eli, but I want to try. I want to try with you. Eli's heart swelled with emotion. He had never expected this. He had thought that Sani would always be running from the past, from the pain. But now it seemed like she was finally ready to face the future. With him. I'm here, Sani. We can take it one day at a time. Together. Sani nodded, a small, hopeful smile tugging at her lips. She had come back from the darkness, and for the first time in a long time she felt a sense of hope. A hope that maybe, just maybe, a new life was possible. A life where the past no longer controlled her, where she could find peace and happiness once again. And as the sun set behind them, casting a warm glow over the desert, Eli and Sani stood together, no longer just two strangers caught in the winds of the past. They were partners ready to face whatever the future held together.